Montana Territory, October 1873. The first snow had dusted the Bitterroot Mountains when Bridgette Waverly collapsed, just past the edge of the timberline. Boots soaked through, skirts torn, and one arm clutched around a baby girl with a cough that rattled the high pines. She had walked for 2 days since the wagon train fell apart in a mess of broken wheels and broken promises, dragging her 2 children through mud and frostbite, while the men who promised to protect them rode off in the night. She did not hear the horse until the hooves were nearly on her. Her knees gave out and she dropped to the ground, half on her side, shielding her children with what little strength she had left. A voice low, calm, and sharp with concern cut through the blur of wind and blood pounding in her ears. "Ma'am, do not move." "I have you." Bridgette blinked up at the man who swung down from the saddle, tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a dark wool coat with snow gathering on the brim of his hat. His gloved hand touched her shoulder, steady and careful. "I cannot stand," she whispered, lips cracked. "My legs." "I will carry you," he said, already kneeling. "The little ones too," her baby whimpered, and the boy beside her 5, maybe 6, tightened his hold on her skirts. His cheeks were red and raw. "I am not leaving them," she said, voice shaking. "You will not." "I promise." He scooped her into his arms without a grunt like he had done it before. The boy stiffened, but the man offered a quiet nod. "What is your name, son?" "Foster," the boy said, hoarse. "Well, Foster, I am Kade Jensen." "Help me get your sister." Foster nodded, lips trembling, and handed over the bundled baby. Kade moved fast, laying Bridgette across his saddle with a blanket tucked around her. Foster and the baby were secured in front of him as he mounted. He rode hard, the snow falling thicker now, the wind biting. Bridgette drifted in and out. She felt the warmth of his coat pressed against her side. She heard him speak gently to Foster, keeping the boy awake, keeping him calm. They reached a cabin deep in the timber by nightfall. Smoke curled from the chimney. The door opened to a wave of heat and the scent of stew. Bridgette felt hands gentle, sure lifting her again. Inside, everything blurred, the fire, the thick quilts, the sound of the baby coughing in a cradle, and then dark. She woke to the creak of floorboards and the smell of pine sap. Her arm ached. Her feet were bandaged. A mug of broth sat on the table beside her, still warm. Kade sat near the hearth, carving a strip of wood, his eyes flicking up the moment she stirred. "Your children are safe," he said. "Foster is asleep. The baby Fern, you said. She is breathing easier now." Bridgette nodded, tears rising. She blinked fast to hold them back. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found us." "Maybe I was meant to," he said, quiet. She took a breath and let it out slow. "You live here alone since spring," he said. "Built this cabin after I left the cattle run down south. Needed quiet. Got more than I bargained for." She gave a tired, crooked smile. "And now you have a woman and 2 children dropped at your doorstep." "Well," he said, setting the carving aside, "I do not mind company, especially not company that needs a place to rest." She looked around. The cabin was small but solid, 2 bunks, a hearth, a table and chairs. A cradle hand carved from cedar. Everything clean and built with care. Bridgette gripped the edge of the blanket. "My husband, he died 6 months ago, fever. We were heading west with a group. They left us behind when the wagon snapped. I thought I could walk us somewhere safe." "You made it far," Kade said. "Too far alone," she swallowed. "I was not ready to give up." "I can see that." He stood and poured her a cup of water. "You are stronger than you look." She took the cup with shaking hands. "Right now I feel too weak to stand." "Then lean on me," he said, steady as earth. "You are not alone anymore." Over the next week, Bridgette regained her strength. Kade cooked, chopped wood, and kept the fire going. He taught Foster how to stack kindling. He held Fern when she cried and sang low songs that made her quiet again. Bridgette watched him from the rocker by the window. He moved like a man who had done hard things but carried them quiet. He never asked too many questions, never looked at her with pity, only kindness. Steady, constant kindness. One evening, as the snow fell heavy outside, Kade knelt beside her to check the bandage on her ankle. "You will be walking again soon," he said. "I do not know where to go," she answered, voice low. There is no one waiting for us. Kade met her eyes. You do not have to go anywhere, not unless you want to. She stared at him, heart thudding. You mean, stay here? He nodded once. This place is big enough for more than one soul, and I would not mind the sound of children in the morning. Her throat tightened. You do not even know me. I know you walked through snow for 2 days to save your children. I know you are braver than most men I have ever met. She blinked fast again, but this time the tear slipped free. I would not be here if not for you. You are here because you fought to be, he said. I just helped you the last few steps. She reached out, fingertips brushing his wrist. He did not pull away. I do not want to be a burden. You are not, he said. You are a beginning. She let out a small, broken laugh. You always talk like that, only when I mean it. She leaned forward, her hand still resting on his. Kade, he looked at her quiet and sure. I am not in a hurry, Bridgette, but I am here, as long as you want me to be, she nodded, voice soft. I want you to be. And for the first time in months she let herself believe she was safe, not just for tonight, but maybe for good. Kade stepped outside before dawn, lantern swinging low in his hand, the sky still black above the pines. The snow had settled deeper overnight. He shoveled a path to the woodshed, breath curling in front of him, each step sinking into the quiet. Behind him, the soft creak of the door sounded. Bridgette stood in the threshold, wrapped in the heavy coat he'd hung near the hearth the night before. Her hair was braided back, face pale but upright, eyes sharp with determination. You should be resting, he said, walking back toward her. I have rested enough, she said. I can help. He didn't argue, only handed her the lantern and took a slower pace toward the shed. She followed close, her boots crunching behind his, steady despite the limp. Inside the shed, the scent of cured pine and split oak filled the stillness. She leaned her hip against the wall while he began stacking logs into his arms. How long have you lived out here? She asked. Since April. I built the cabin through the thaw. He paused to look at her. We left Kansas in June. Took the southern route through Wyoming before turning north. I thought we'd settle near Helena. He nodded, placing the logs into a canvas sling. Why Montana? My older brother came out this way before the war, sent letters about the meadows near Missoula, said the land felt honest. Kade adjusted the strap over his shoulder. It is. Honest and lonely, both. Bridgette looked out through the open door where morning light had begun to silver the edges of the trees. Lonely I could manage, as long as it was safe. They returned to the cabin in silence, the lantern swinging between them. Inside, Foster sat cross-legged on the floor, stacking wooden blocks from the basket Kade had carved over the summer. Fern lay wrapped in blankets, her breath even now. Later that morning, Kade caught the boy watching him while he stirred a pot of cornmeal at the stove. You ever use a hammer, Foster? The boy nodded slowly. My pa taught me some, before he got sick. Kade handed him a small mallet from the shelf. How about we build your sister a proper crib? This one's just a cradle. Won't suit her long. Foster's face lit with something sturdier than excitement pride. He scrambled to his feet and followed Kade outside again, the cold forgotten. Bridgette sat at the table, mending the hem of her sleeve with tight, practiced stitches. She watched the door close behind them, her hands stilling for a breath. By late afternoon, sawdust dusted both Kade's coat and Foster's hair. The boy listened close, asking questions in quiet tones, mimicking Kade's movements with a seriousness beyond his years. When the crib frame began to take shape, Kade handed Foster the rasp, smooth every edge. A baby's skin's too soft for splinters. Foster nodded, his jaw set. Bridgette didn't come out until the sun dropped behind the ridgeline, casting the sky in copper. She brought them both a slice of cornbread and stood watching the crib's shape emerge. You've done more for us than anyone since my husband passed, she said, voice low. Kade met her gaze but said nothing. She looked down at the smooth grain of the pine. Foster hasn't spoken that much in months. Not since we buried his father. He brushed a shaving from the rail. Some boys don't talk when they're grieving, they build. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the tin plate. You understand boys. I was one once, he said. and I've seen enough of what makes them quiet." That night, the warmth in the cabin came from more than the fire. Kade set the new crib by the hearth, and Foster placed Fern inside with careful hands. Bridgette stood beside them, her palm resting on her son's shoulder. After the children were asleep, she sat at the hearth, the firelight flickering across her face. Kade poured her a mug of warm cider and sat across from her, boots stretched toward the heat. "You lost someone too, didn't you?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. The wind outside shifted, brushing against the corners of the cabin like a hand on wood. "My brother," he said finally. "War took him. Not a bullet. Just the years after, he never found his footing again, came west with me but didn't stay." She looked at him, quiet. "That's why you're alone out here." It seemed easier than waiting for someone to leave again, he said. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Bridgette folded her hands in her lap. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and we'll still be on the trail, still cold. Still alone." "You're not," he said. "Not anymore." She looked down, then back up at him. "I don't know what comes next, but I want to stay, if you'll let us." Kade didn't move, but something in his expression softened, the same way snow melts along the edge of sunlit stone. "I'd like that," he said. When she rose to clean the dishes, he stood too, but she waved him off. "Sit. You've done enough for one day." He watched her move through the room, steady again, her steps no longer faltering. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered what it might feel like to share mornings, not just survive them. The snow held fast for days, the world outside hushed and white, but within the cabin, a quiet rhythm began to settle in. Bridgette rose early now, her limp softer each morning, and often she was already feeding Fern by the time Kade returned from checking the traps. He'd set near the creek bend. Foster followed him out some mornings, eager to learn the patterns of the land where the fox dens lay, how to read the snow for sign. That afternoon, Kade brought in a hare, cleaned and dressed before the sun crested the trees. Bridgette stood at the table, sorting lentils from a small burlap sack. Her sleeves were rolled, fingers stained from chopping wild onion. She glanced at the hare, then at him. "You ever tried it with vinegar and dried currant?" "Can't say I have," he said, setting down the knife. "But I'd trust your hand before mine." She gave a nod, small and sure, then reached for the pot already warming near the hearth. The scent of thyme drifted into the room, earthy and sharp. Foster sat near the corner, carving a strip of bark down to a point. Kade watched the boy's grip, how he turned the blade just so. He didn't interrupt. Instead, he leaned against the doorframe and looked over to Bridgette. "Found a stand of birch past the ridge this morning," he said. "Thought I might fell a few before the thaw. Could use the wood come spring." She stirred the pot, eyes on the slow swirl of broth. "You plant anything?" "Potatoes. Beans. Tried for squash, but the soil's stone heavy. Might need someone to show me how to coax more out of it." She gave him a glance then, not quite smiling. "I grew up with my hands in dirt. My mother had a half-acre of kitchen garden back in Harvey County. She could grow cabbage in gravel." His gaze lingered on her. "You miss Kansas?" "I miss what it was before," she said. "Not what we left behind." He didn't press. Instead, he stepped to the stove and fetched the ladle, giving the stew a stir. "You ever think about making a place yours again?" he asked, voice low. Bridgette's hands paused. Steam curled between them. "I thought I had once," she said. "But it wasn't built to last." He didn't answer, just reached for the bread tin and began slicing to fill the silence gently. She watched the way his shoulders moved, solid and unhurried. There was no push in him, only steadiness. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Bridgette sat sewing by lamplight while Kade whittled beside the fire. The warmth of the room stretched between them, quiet and unspoken. She set her work down, fingers resting lightly on the linen. "You always this patient?" she asked. He looked up, the blade still in his hand. "Not always, only when it matters." She drew in a slow breath. "I haven't known a man who waited long enough to let something take root." "I've known too many who didn't," he said. The wind stirred the shutters. Kade stood, crossed the room, and checked the latch. Then he turned, and for a long moment they just looked at one another across the soft glow of lamplight. I don't want to presume, he said, voice steadier than the fire popping behind him. But if this is a place you want to stay beyond the thaw, I'd be glad for it, not just out of kindness. Bridgette's throat moved with the effort of her breath. I don't need kindness, she said. I need truth. Then here it is, he said, stepping closer. I've come to care for you. And your children, more than I expected, more than I thought I would ever let myself again. Her eyes didn't waver. I'm not whole, not yet. I don't know how long it'll take. He knelt beside her chair, his hands resting on his knees, not reaching. Then let it take as long as it needs. I'm not going anywhere. She reached out, almost without realizing, and let her fingers rest against his shoulder. For the first time, the silence between them held something warmer than caution, something that looked a little like hope. I think I could stay, she said. You already have, he answered, and neither of them looked away. By the second week of November, the snow had begun to crust, hard packed beneath a sky the color of iron. Kade stood at the edge of the clearing, axe balanced across his shoulder, watching Bridgette hang linens on a rope line he'd strung between two pine posts. Her hands moved with quiet precision, the fabric stiff with cold but clean. Fern fussed from the basket nestled beside the porch, and Foster crouched nearby, carving notches into a sapling branch with the same care Kade had once shown him. Bridgette didn't look up until she'd pinned the last sheet. Her cheeks were pink with wind and wisps of hair had worked loose from her braid. You don't have to keep standing there like that, she said, brushing her palms together. I like seeing things take shape, he said. She tilted her head. Wood or people? Both, he answered. But people are harder. He stepped toward the cabin, boots crunching through the frozen thatch. She met him halfway, arms folded across her chest, not against him but the cold. He offered her his gloves without a word, and after a second she took them. I've been thinking, she said, tugging the leather snug. About spring. He waited, the wind combing through the trees above them. I can't keep leaning on you forever, she said. It's not fair. You think fairness has anything to do with it? He asked. I think it's easier to feel grateful than to let someone care about you without earning it. He looked at her, not with surprise but something quieter. You don't owe me a thing. I know, she said, but I want to belong here, not just be sheltered. He nodded once. Then let's make it yours, she blinked. What do you mean? There's land to the south that hasn't been cleared. We could plant come thaw, build a root cellar, maybe even stretch the cabin if we put the time in. And you'd let me do that with you? No, he said. I'd want you to. Later that night, after the fire dimmed and the children were asleep, Bridgette stepped out onto the porch while Kade cleaned his rifle inside. The moon hung low and full, casting long gray light over the snow. She didn't hear him join her until the boards creaked behind her. You always go quiet when the moon's up like this? He asked. I used to, she said. When I was a girl, I'd sneak out to the pasture and lie on my back just to feel how big the world was. He leaned against the post beside her, arms crossed, his breath visible in the cold. What made you stop? Marriage, children, worry. I lost the habit of wonder, I guess. You haven't lost it, he said. You're just remembering it again. She turned toward him, her eyes catching the silver light. Do you ever wonder if we're allowed to be happy again? After everything? I think surviving ought to buy us the right to try. She took a breath, slow and steady. I want to build a life, not just borrow one, if you'll have me. He stepped close, his voice low and sure. There's no part of this I want without you in it. She reached up, her hand resting just over his heart. He covered it with his own, the weight of it solid and warm. I never thought I'd be strong enough to love again, she said. You are, he said. Because you let yourself be known. She leaned into him, and for the first time it didn't feel like leaning on someone out of weakness. It felt like standing with someone who had chosen her, not out of pity or duty, but because he saw her and stayed. Inside, Fern stirred in her sleep. Bridgette stepped back, but Kade touched her wrist gently. I'll rock her, he said. You've done enough today. She watched him disappear into the cabin, the lamplight catching the edge of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from the quiet ache of something healing. The wind had changed. Not sharp now, but softer. Like the world was beginning to shift towards something warmer, something lasting. By late December, the snow no longer surprised them. It came steady, layered deep along the eaves and fence posts, but the cabin held strong. Inside, days moved with quiet purpose. Each had its place, feeding the animals, mending what needed it, tending to Fern's growing appetite, and teaching Foster his letters at the table by the window. That morning, Bridgette stirred biscuit dough while Kade repaired a cracked yolk in the corner. Foster sat on the floor, his brow furrowed over the alphabet slate Kade had carved from pine. "I took a walk before sunup," Bridgette said, voice casual, though her hands slowed. "Just around the ridge." Kade looked up, wiping sawdust off his sleeve. "Saw anything worth seeing? A trail of pheasant tracks and a fox's. Looked like she passed through just before me." "You followed her." To the edge of the bramble, she circled back once, then vanished. "Smart one." He crossed the room, set the yolk aside, and leaned against the hearth. She glanced up at him, the flour dusting her cheek, catching light. "You went alone?" he asked gently. "I needed to feel the hush," she said. "It's different out there. Like the land remembers when to be still." Kade nodded slowly, then pushed a strand of hair behind her ear with a touch so light it barely registered. "Next time, let me walk the edge with you." She studied him for a moment. "You do that?" "Even if I don't say a word." "I do that especially if you don't." That night, she found him outside, tending the lanterns strung beneath the porch eaves. The snow glowed pale blue under the moon, and his breath rose in slow clouds as he adjusted the wick. She brought out 2 mugs of warm cider, handing him one without a word. They stood side by side, the silence full of things neither needed to explain. "I got a letter once," he said eventually, eyes on the tree line. "From my brother after he left. It was just 1 page. Said he couldn't carry the weight of peace." Bridgette's fingers tightened around the mug. "Did you keep it?" "No, I read it once and burned it, not out of anger. I didn't want to let it be the last word." She turned, her expression unreadable. "I wonder if we ever really get to start fresh, or if we just carry things quieter." "Maybe both," he said. "Maybe it's not about starting over. Maybe it's about building something that can hold what came before." She stepped closer, the hem of her skirt brushing his boot. "You'd want to build that with me?" "I already am," he said. Wind stirred through the pines. She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers with his. "I never thought I'd want to marry again." "You don't have to," he said, "unless you want to." She looked up at him, her voice steady. "I do." They married quietly the week after the New Year. Kade carved 2 rings from juniper, polished smooth and pale. Foster stood beside him, nervous and proud, while Bridgette held Fern in her arms, wearing a wool dress she'd sewn from a bolt of navy she'd brought all the way from Kansas. The preacher rode in from the valley, a man Kade had once helped rebuild a roof after wind tore it loose. The vows were short, the fire warm, and when Kade kissed her, it felt like the final stone set into place. That night, after the children had been tucked into bed, Kade and Bridgette stood in the quiet cabin, the fire low and steady. She turned to him, her voice soft with wonder. "We made it, didn't we?" He cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing the corners of her mouth. "We did. And we'll keep making it every day." When she leaned into him, it wasn't with hesitation but surety. The kiss they shared then was slow and rooted, not the start of something uncertain, but the confirmation of something already built with care. In the seasons that followed, the land thawed and turned green again. Bridgette planted rows of beans and onions in the southern patch, while Kade built a second room onto the cabin, one with wide windows to catch the morning sun. Foster learned to ride bareback and read simple books aloud by the fire. Fern took her first steps one bright spring morning, gripping the edge of the table with determination. Neighbors began to visit a young couple with a cart of apples, an old woman who gave Bridgette a spool of dyed thread in exchange for herbs. The cabin, once a place of solitude, became a place of welcome. Bridgette carved a small bench from a pine stump. Kade built a smokehouse. They never spoke of what they'd survived. There was no need. It lived in the way he reached for her hand without prompting, in the way she knew the slope of his shoulder by heart. Years passed, each one marked not by loss, but by what grew: laughter in the yard, the scent of baking bread, children's boots lined by the door, and two people who had found each other not in rescue but in recognition. They grew older with grace. And they stayed through flood and drought, through long winters and early thaws, because home was not the cabin or the land or even the sky above them. It was each other, and they never left it.